Senator Sampson.
Good morning, Madam President. Delighted to see you up there. I have great respect for my colleague, Senator Looney, and his contribution to this chamber, but I have to disagree with his comments a moment ago. Over the last several days, I've been speaking with friends and neighbors, mentioning that this vote was coming and that we would be here today to debate the resolution that would extend the governor's executive authority under the declarations of public health and civil preparedness emergency. And I've been met with almost a complete and universal reaction with, wait, what? Followed almost every time by, wait a second, there is no emergency. And I always say, yeah, no kidding. We don't have to get into the daily statistics that have been released by the governor's own administration to be aware that there is no current emergency, not an actual or true emergency in any case. And it is true, we have come a long way since the beginning of the COVID pandemic. I'm sure people listening will recall the phrase 15 days to slow the spread. And along the way, we've had many, many contentious debates about the role of government. And essentially, the argument is between the government's responsibility as far as public safety and public health versus the individual liberty of free American citizens. And of course, this is an important debate to have, and it's much needed, clearly in the state our society finds itself in today. And it's definitely important when there is indeed a true emergency. I want to just read something very briefly from the governor's own letter that he provided the legislature, indicating he wanted to extend these his powers and therefore the executive orders that accompany them. He says, quote unquote, "We are engaged in one of the most successful vaccination campaigns in the nation, one that must continue and must also evolve in order to remain successful. More than 67% of our population has received at least one dose of the vaccine, and more than 61% are fully vaccinated. Fully 79.6% of adults in Connecticut have received at least one dose. As a result, our infection rate is low, with an average of only 40 new cases per day and a test positivity rate that has hovered consistently below 1% for weeks. Most significantly, hospitalizations and deaths attributed to COVID-19 have plummeted and remain low." So by the governor's own admission, there is no emergency. I don't think anyone could draft those words and put them in a letter without believing that they had been successful. The discussion about whether or not we need to have the governor in power in a way that allows him to react quickly, as was indicated by the Senate President, is a legitimate debate. There's no question about it. But that debate only matters when there's a real emergency at hand, and we do not have one. That is the most important part of this conversation, is a recognition of whether or not we are in a state of emergency. People vary about what they believe the governor's authority ought to be anyway, whether or not the governor ever had the authority to do many of the things that he has done, even at the height of the COVID pandemic. I, for one, argued that he shouldn't have had the right to determine which businesses and individuals are essential versus those that are non-essential. I argued that in a free society, it is people who make that decision about whether or not they want to open their business or they want to frequent that business. It is not some arbitrary government entity or the governor himself imposing his belief system on them. The public realm has always been the area where people make their own determination about what is safe about what happens. And obviously the government has a role there, and that debate should, as I mentioned a moment ago, it should happen, and we should continue to have it. But now is different. There is no emergency at all. We are here in this room right now. And we could easily vote on each and every one of the executive orders that the governor is talking about. He's even provided us with the list of 11 executive orders. We could do that all in one day quite easily. We could do it today quite easily. And that is our responsibility, and we should. I'll just point out that if you look at this document that shows the 11 executive orders that the governor intends to issue as a result of this extension, there is no mistaking what's on this list. And everyone should be aware that if a legislator, their representative, or their senator votes in favor of this extension, they are voting in favor of these executive orders at the same time, because essentially they are handing over their vote to the governor to make that decision for them. And among the items on here are Executive Order 9-1, which is essentially the order that is requiring school children from pre-K through 12th grade to wear masks in schools. Simply put, if you vote yes for this extension, you are voting yes to put masks on children in schools. There's also Executive Order 12D, which continues the eviction moratorium, which is putting untold amount of stress on a great part of the business community in our state. I've got landlords that have their properties being foreclosed, who cannot afford to support their families because they have been put aside in favor of this legislation, which is unconstitutional on its face, because the United States Constitution prohibits the governor or even the legislature from interfering in a private contract like a lease. Make no mistake, anyone who votes to extend these executive orders is voting to keep these policies in place. And I'll remind everyone, it is utter irony that we are in this room today to say it's too scary or too dangerous to come to this room to vote. Then what are we doing here exactly? It's absurd on its face. If an emergency occurs tomorrow, a week from now, 3 months from now, if the Delta variant, as was mentioned, becomes a thing in Connecticut, the governor of the state of Connecticut can issue an executive order or issue his emergency declaration at that moment. And it is in force at that moment. We have a process for that. Basically, the governor would issue his emergency declaration, and then the it's not six. It is the leadership of the 4 caucuses and the leadership of the Public Health Committee. I don't know how many people that makes up, but they will be the ones, as have in the past, to vote to determine whether or not they can veto, essentially, that governor's emergency declaration. The point is, we don't need to be here. We do not need to be renewing this declaration. We don't need to be doing any of this. If an actual emergency occurs, there is a mechanism, the same exact mechanism that was used in March of last year when this first began. But I suppose the governor figures it's a lot easier to do whatever you want than to let the legislature vote on things. But he should know that that's how we do things in a free country. Being referred to daily as King Ned is not a term of endearment. It's a message that something is gravely wrong. History will remember how we vote in this chamber today, because our job as state senators is to represent our constituents, who are free citizens, who ask us to bring their values and their ideas and their wants and needs to this body to make decisions about the policy that will run the state of Connecticut. Voting yes today means you do not want to do that job. I would question any one of my colleagues, even under an emergency, whether or not they think it's okay to relinquish their responsibility and give it to the governor. But under these circumstances, with no reason and no emergency, it's unforgivable. I'll be voting no today, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson. Will you remark further?